I am talking about someone we almost never hear from before, during, and after those cases. Former DOJ Special Counsel Jack Smith, the only federal prosecutor to indict a president. He just doesn't speak much. You might recall that if you remember those busy periods during his 2 cases over the past years. But he has now, the news tonight, made this rare public appearance. And it's with someone you might recognize, a fellow Justice Department veteran, Andrew Weissman, who also, we should note, is an MSNBC analyst. So this is big news, full disclosure, someone we work with. But when this hit, I don't care who he happened to be talking to, it was going to be a big deal because it was his first comments.
Okay, so buckle up, because what just dropped in Washington is absolutely explosive. Former Special Counsel Jack Smith, the guy who investigated Trump for the classified documents case in the January 6th stuff, just handed over previously unreleased audio recordings to congressional investigators. And according to sources who've heard these tapes, they're devastating. We're talking about internal Department of Justice recordings that allegedly capture Trump officials pressuring DOJ leadership to shut down or reshape prosecutions. We're talking about evidence of potential presidential interference in active criminal investigations. We're talking about what one DOJ official described as a constitutional panic inside the Justice Department. And the timing of this couldn't be more explosive, because Trump is currently sitting in the White House, and these tapes apparently show his administration trying to corrupt the very investigations that were targeting him. Now, if that sounds like something out of a political thriller, you're not alone in thinking that. But this is real. This is happening right now, and the implications are staggering. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. CNN reported on October 23rd that Jack Smith has formally asked Congress and the DOJ for permission to testify publicly about these recordings. He wants to clarify what he calls mischaracterizations and reveal evidence that was previously kept secret under grand jury rules. And attorneys who are familiar with the situation are describing these tapes as the recordings everyone has been whispering about. Like, people in the legal community have known something like this existed, but nobody's been able to confirm it until now. And now Smith is ready to go public with it. He wants to testify. He wants to play the tapes. He wants to put it all on the record. Think about how significant that is. Jack Smith spent years investigating Trump. He brought 2 separate federal indictments against a former president, which had never been done before in American history. He had Trump dead to rights on multiple charges related to classified documents and election interference. And then Trump won the election, came back to power, and immediately had his new attorney general shut down all of Smith's cases. Smith was forced to resign, his prosecutions were dismissed, and for months, it looked like Trump had gotten away with everything. But now Smith is coming back, and he's got receipts, he's got audio recordings that apparently prove Trump's administration was interfering with federal prosecutions, and he wants the American people to hear them. Now let's talk about what's allegedly on these tapes, because the details that have leaked so far are absolutely damning. According to the New York Times reporting from October 21st, leaked portions of the recordings confirmed that senior officials discussed political retaliation against investigators during calls with FBI leadership. Read that again. Senior officials, meaning people in Trump's administration, were discussing how to retaliate against the investigators who were looking into Trump's crimes. That's not just unethical, that's potentially criminal. That's obstruction of justice. That's witness intimidation. That's corruption at the highest levels of government. Reuters reported on October 17th that congressional letters are now accusing Trump's DOJ of obstructing evidence tied to Smith's 2023 indictments. And they're specifically pointing to missing audio from White House DOJ coordination calls about special counsel restrictions. So there were calls between the White House and the Justice Department about how to restrict or control Jack Smith's investigation. And audio recordings of those calls exist, and apparently they show exactly what we all suspected, that Trump's people were actively trying to interfere with the prosecution. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Jack Smith didn't just investigate Trump, he also issued subpoenas for phone records of some Republican members of Congress who were involved in the January 6th events, and Republicans have been screaming about that for months, claiming Smith overstepped his authority, claiming it was political persecution, claiming he violated their rights. But Fox News reported on October 22nd that Smith is defending those subpoenas, saying they were lawful and limited, and the internal DOJ recordings that he's now turning over apparently back that up. They apparently show that everything Smith did was approved through proper channels, that he followed the rules, and that the subpoenas were legally justified. So not only do the tapes potentially incriminate Trump, they also vindicate Smith. They show he was doing his job properly while Trump's people were trying to corrupt the process. The political reaction to all of this has been predictably chaotic. Trump immediately went on Truth Social and called Jack Smith a deranged criminal leaking hoaxes, which is pretty rich coming from Trump, but whatever. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats are demanding a full review of all DOJ chain of command recordings. Senator Dick Durbin, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, said this is bigger than Watergate if verified, and he's not wrong. Watergate was about a president covering up a burglary and obstructing justice. This is about a president actively interfering with federal prosecutions of himself, pressuring DOJ officials to drop cases, and potentially retaliating against investigators. That's Watergate on steroids. And legal scholars are already speculating about what happens next. Some think these recordings could be used to reopen obstruction charges against Trump. Others think they could put senior Trump aides at criminal risk for evidence tampering or ethics violations. And there's talk that Smith himself could face prosecution from Trump's DOJ for releasing these recordings, even though he's trying to do it through official channels. So we've got this incredible situation where the former special counsel who investigated the president is now trying to blow the whistle on corruption at the highest levels, and he's got audio evidence to back it up, but he needs permission to make it public. And the very people he's trying to expose are the ones who control whether he gets that permission. It's an absolute mess, and it's about to get a whole lot messier. Because if Smith does testify, if these tapes do get released, if the American people actually hear Trump officials plotting to obstruct justice and retaliate against investigators, that changes everything. It's not speculation anymore. It's not partisan accusations. It's hard evidence. And even Trump's most loyal supporters are going to have a hard time explaining that away. So yeah, Washington is absolutely rocked right now. Jack Smith's secret DOJ tapes are the story everyone's talking about. Trump is melting down. Democrats are demanding investigations. Republicans are scrambling to defend Trump. And somewhere in a secure facility, there are audio recordings that could potentially bring down a presidency. Stay with me, because we're going to break down exactly what's on these tapes, why they matter, and what happens next in this absolute political earthquake. Alright, so let's dig into the details of what we actually know about these recordings and why they're so significant. Because this isn't just about some embarrassing phone calls or awkward conversations. This is about potential evidence of systematic corruption and obstruction of justice at the highest levels of government. First, we need to understand the context of Jack Smith's investigations. Smith was appointed as special counsel in November 2022 by Attorney General Merrick Garland. His mandate was to investigate two separate matters involving Donald Trump. First, the classified documents case, where Trump allegedly took hundreds of classified documents to Mar-a-Lago after leaving office and then obstructed efforts to get them back. Second, the January 6 case, where Trump allegedly conspired to overturn the 2020 election results and incited the attack on the Capitol. Smith moved quickly on both investigations. By June 2023, he had indicted Trump on 37 counts related to the classified documents. By August 2023, he had indicted Trump on 4 counts related to January 6th. These were historic indictments. No former president had ever been federally indicted before, and Smith had built what legal experts consider to be very strong cases with mountains of evidence. But then Trump won the 2024 election, and one of his first acts as president was to install loyalists at the Department of Justice, who immediately moved to dismiss all of Smith's cases. The legal theory was that you can't prosecute a sitting president, which is a DOJ policy, though not a constitutional requirement. So Smith was forced to drop the cases and resign, and for months it looked like that was the end of it. Trump had escaped justice by winning an election, but apparently Smith wasn't done. According to the CNN report from October 23rd, Smith has been working behind the scenes to preserve evidence and prepare for the possibility of testifying about what happened during his investigations, and that includes these audio recordings. Now, what exactly are these recordings? Based on the reporting from multiple sources, they appear to be internal DOJ audio logs of meetings and phone calls. The Justice Department records a lot of its official business, especially when it involves coordination between different offices or sensitive legal matters. It's a way of creating an official record and protecting against later disputes about what was said or decided. And apparently, some of these recordings capture conversations about Jack Smith's investigations, conversations where Trump administration officials were discussing how to interfere with or shut down the prosecutions, conversations where people talked about retaliating against investigators, conversations that could constitute evidence of obstruction of justice. The New York Times report from October 21st provides some of the most damning details. According to their sources, leaked portions of the recordings confirmed that senior officials discussed political retaliation against investigators and calls with FBI leadership. Think about what that means. The FBI is supposed to be independent. FBI agents are supposed to investigate crimes based on evidence, not based on politics. But apparently, senior Trump administration officials were on the phone with FBI leadership discussing how to go after the investigators who were looking into Trump. That's banana republic stuff. That's the kind of thing that happens in authoritarian countries, not in the United States. But apparently, it happened and it was recorded. Reuters added another layer to this story with their October 17th report. They revealed that congressional letters are now accusing Trump's DOJ of obstructing evidence tied to Smith's cases, and specifically, they're pointing to missing audio from White House DOJ coordination calls about special counsel restrictions. So there were official calls between the White House and the Justice Department about how to restrict or control Jack Smith's investigation, and recordings of those calls should exist as part of the official record, but apparently some of them are missing, which raises the question, were they destroyed? Were they hidden? Who has them? And what do they show? This is where the story gets really legally complicated, because there are a lot of questions about who has the authority to do what with these recordings. Jack Smith is asking for permission to testify publicly and presumably to present these recordings as evidence, but he needs permission from both Congress and the DOJ. Congress has the authority to call witnesses and conduct oversight. So if the relevant committees want to hear from Smith, they can subpoena him. But the DOJ also has some say, because the recordings likely involve sensitive law enforcement information, grand jury material, and potentially classified national security matters. So even if Congress wants to hear from Smith, the DOJ could try to block it by claiming executive privilege or other legal protections. And here's the kicker. The current DOJ is run by Trump appointees. The Attorney General is Pam Bondi, a Trump loyalist who's already been accused of using the Justice Department to target Trump's political opponents. So Smith is essentially asking permission from the people he's trying to expose, which is why some legal experts think he's also preserving the recordings in other ways, maybe by sharing them with state prosecutors or congressional investigators who can't be blocked by the DOJ. Fox News reported on October 22nd that Smith is also defending his earlier investigative tactics, specifically the subpoenas he issued for phone records of Republican members of Congress. This is important because Republicans have been attacking Smith for months over these subpoenas, claiming he violated separation of powers and congressional privileges. But Smith is saying the subpoenas were entirely proper and lawful, and apparently the internal DOJ recordings back him up. They apparently show that Smith went through all the proper approval processes, that senior DOJ officials signed off on the subpoenas, and that everything was done by the book. So not only do the recordings potentially show Trump administration corruption, they also vindicate Smith's conduct as a prosecutor, which makes sense, right? Because Smith is a career prosecutor with a sterling reputation. He's prosecuted war crimes. He's taken on public corruption cases. He's not some partisan hack. He's a serious lawyer who follows the rules. And the recordings apparently prove that. Now, let's talk about what's actually on these tapes based on what's been leaked so far. According to multiple sources, the recordings include discussions of verbal orders from White House advisors meant to override prosecutorial guidelines. What does that mean? Prosecutorial guidelines are the rules that govern how federal prosecutors make decisions about investigations and charges. They're supposed to be based on the evidence and the law, not on politics. But apparently, White House advisors were given orders that contradicted those guidelines. Orders to slow down certain investigations, orders to drop certain charges, orders to focus on different targets. And these orders were being discussed in recorded DOJ meetings. One source described it as a constitutional panic inside the DOJ. Career prosecutors and agents apparently realized that they were being pressured to violate their oaths and corrupt the justice system for political purposes. And some of them documented it. Some of them made sure these conversations were recorded so there would be evidence if it ever came to light. And now it's coming to light. Another element that's been reported is discussions of political retaliation. According to the New York Times, the recordings include conversations where officials talked about going after the investigators themselves, not because the investigators did anything wrong, but because they were investigating Trump. This is witness intimidation. This is obstruction. This is exactly the kind of conduct that would be criminal if anyone other than the president were doing it. And it raises huge questions about accountability, because if the president's aides were openly discussing criminal conduct on recorded DOJ phone calls and nothing was done about it, what does that say about our system of justice? It says that people in power think they're above the law, and maybe they're right if we don't hold them accountable. Now, Trump's response to all of this has been predictably unhinged. He went on Truth Social and called Jack Smith a deranged criminal who's leaking hoaxes. He said the whole thing is a witch hunt and that Smith should be prosecuted for releasing classified information. He's trying to flip the script and make Smith the bad guy instead of addressing the actual content of what's on the tapes. But here's the thing. Smith isn't leaking anything. He's trying to testify through official channels. He's asking for permission to present evidence to Congress as part of their constitutional oversight function. That's not a leak. That's transparency. That's accountability. And Trump's freak out about it tells you he's terrified of what's on those tapes. Because if the recordings were exculpatory, if they showed Trump was innocent, he'd be demanding they be released immediately. The fact that he's attacking Smith and trying to prevent the testimony tells you the tapes are damaging. Meanwhile, Democrats in Congress are seizing on this opportunity. Senator Dick Durbin, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, issued a statement saying this is bigger than Watergate if verified. He's demanding a full review of all DOJ recordings related to communications with the White House about pending investigations. Other Democratic senators are calling for Smith to testify in public hearings. They want the tapes played for the American people. They want transparency, but Republicans are in a tough spot. Because if they support transparency, they're potentially exposing Trump to massive political and legal damage. But if they try to block Smith's testimony, they look like they're covering up corruption. Some Republicans are trying to thread the needle by attacking Smith's credibility while not directly addressing the tapes. They're saying Smith is a partisan operative who can't be trusted. They're saying he's trying to undermine Trump's presidency. They're saying this is all a political stunt, but that's going to be a hard sell if the actual audio recordings get released and the American people can hear for themselves what was said. Because you can spin a lot of things in politics, but you can't spin audio recordings of people discussing how to obstruct justice. That's just evidence. And evidence is hard to argue with. Legal experts are already speculating about the potential consequences if these recordings become public. Some think they could be used to reopen criminal investigations into obstruction of justice, both against Trump and against senior aides who are involved in these discussions. Others think they could lead to impeachment proceedings, though that seems unlikely given Republican control of the House. Still, others think they could be used in civil lawsuits or state prosecutions where Trump doesn't have the same protections he has against federal charges. And there's also the question of what this does to Jack Smith personally, because by coming forward with this evidence, he's making himself a target. Trump has already called for him to be prosecuted, and Trump's DOJ could absolutely try to bring charges against Smith for releasing sensitive information, even if he does it through official channels. So Smith is taking a huge personal risk here. He's potentially sacrificing his career, his freedom, maybe even his safety, to expose what he believes is corruption at the highest levels of government. That's the definition of whistleblowing, and it suggests he thinks what's on these tapes is serious enough that it's worth the risk. Okay, so let's break down what all of this means and where it's heading, because this story has implications that go way beyond just Trump or Jack Smith or even this particular scandal. We're talking about fundamental questions about accountability, the rule of law, and whether our democratic system can survive this level of corruption. First, let's talk about the legal implications. If these recordings actually contain what sources say they contain, if there's audio evidence of Trump administration officials discussing how to interfere with federal prosecutions, that's textbook obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice is a federal crime. It's what got Nixon. It's what almost got Clinton. It's one of the most serious crimes a government official can commit because it strikes at the heart of our legal system. The whole point of having laws is that they apply equally to everyone. But if people in power can use their positions to stop investigations into themselves, then the laws don't mean anything. It's just whoever has the most power gets to do whatever they want. And if the recordings show discussions of retaliating against investigators, that's even worse. That's witness intimidation. That's potentially conspiracy to commit crimes. That's creating a climate of fear where law enforcement officials can't do their jobs without worrying about political retaliation. Now, the big question is whether anyone will actually be held accountable for any of this, because here's the harsh reality. Trump is president. He controls the Justice Department. He has the power to pardon anyone who gets charged with crimes. He has the power to fire anyone who tries to investigate him. So even if there's clear evidence of criminal conduct on these tapes, what happens? Can you prosecute a sitting president? DOJ policy says no, though that's just a policy, not a constitutional rule. Can you prosecute former aides who were following presidential orders? Maybe, but Trump could just pardon them. Can you impeach Trump based on this evidence? Theoretically, yes, but Republicans control the House, and they've already shown they're not willing to hold Trump accountable for anything. So we could be in this situation where everyone knows crimes were committed, there's audio evidence proving it, and nothing happens because the people who committed the crimes have enough political power to avoid consequences. And if that happens, if Trump and his people get away with this, that sets a precedent that's absolutely terrifying, because it means future presidents will know they can obstruct justice, interfere with investigations, and retaliate against law enforcement with impunity. As long as they have enough political support, they're untouchable. That's not a democracy. That's not a constitutional republic. That's an elected dictatorship. Second, let's talk about what this means for Jack Smith personally and for the institution of special counsels more broadly. Smith was appointed to investigate Trump precisely because there were concerns about conflicts of interest if regular DOJ prosecutors handled it. The idea of a special counsel is that they're somewhat independent, somewhat insulated from political pressure, so they can follow the evidence wherever it leads. But Smith's experience shows the limits of that independence. He built strong cases, he brought indictments, he was doing his job, and then Trump won an election, installed loyalists at DOJ, and shut everything down. Smith couldn't stop it. The special counsel regulations don't give him enough independence to resist a president who's determined to corrupt the process. So now Smith is left in this position where he has evidence of crimes, but no way to prosecute them through normal channels. His only option is to go public, to testify before Congress, to try to get the information to the American people, and hope that public pressure leads to accountability. That's not how the system is supposed to work, but it might be the only option left when the system itself has been corrupted. And if Smith does testify, if he does release these recordings, he's going to face massive retaliation. Trump has already promised to prosecute him. Trump's supporters are already calling for him to be jailed. Smith could face criminal charges, lose his law license, become unemployable in his profession. He could face threats to his safety and his family's safety. And he knows all of that, and he's doing it anyway. That takes incredible courage. And it also tells you how serious he thinks this evidence is, because prosecutors don't throw away their careers lightly. Third, let's talk about Congress's role in all of this, because if the DOJ won't hold Trump accountable, Congress is supposed to be the backup. That's why we have congressional oversight. That's why Congress has the power to investigate and impeach. But congressional oversight only works if there's political will to use it. And right now, with Republicans controlling the House, there isn't. House Republicans have shown zero interest in investigating Trump. In fact, they've been actively helping him by investigating his investigators, by trying to discredit Jack Smith, by pushing conspiracy theories about the deep state. So even if Smith testifies before a Senate committee, even if Democrats in the Senate hold hearings and release the recordings, what happens? The House isn't going to impeach, Republican senators aren't going to vote to convict, and Trump is going to claim vindication because he wasn't removed from office. This is the fundamental problem with our current system. It was designed with the assumption that both parties would value democracy and the rule of law more than partisan advantage, that enough members of Congress would put country over party when faced with clear evidence of presidential corruption. But that assumption has been proven wrong. Republicans have decided that protecting Trump is more important than protecting democratic institutions. And as long as that's true, all the evidence in the world doesn't matter. Trump can commit crimes on tape, and his party will still defend him. Fourth, let's address the political implications heading into 2026 midterms. If these recordings do become public, if the American people actually hear Trump officials discussing how to obstruct justice and retaliate against investigators, that's going to be a massive campaign issue. Democrats are going to hammer it relentlessly. They're going to run ads featuring the audio. They're going to paint every Republican candidate as complicit in corruption if they don't condemn Trump. They're going to argue that the GOP has become a party that's willing to destroy democracy to protect one man, and that message might resonate with moderate and independent voters who are already concerned about Trump's authoritarian tendencies. Polling consistently shows that Trump's legal troubles hurt him with persuadable voters, and hard evidence of obstruction of justice in Trump's own administration's voices could be even more damaging. But here's the thing, Trump's base doesn't care. They've already decided that anything negative about Trump is fake news or a witch hunt. They're not going to be persuaded by audio recordings. They're going to claim the tapes are doctored or taken out of context, or that what Trump did was actually legal and fine. So the recordings might hurt Trump with moderates, but they'll probably energize his base even more. They'll see it as more proof that the deep state is out to get him. And that dynamic where the same evidence pushes different groups in opposite directions is part of what makes our political polarization so dangerous. We can't even agree on basic facts anymore. We can't agree on whether crimes are crimes if the person committing them is on our team. Fifth, we need to talk about what this reveals about the corruption of the Justice Department under Trump, because that's really what these recordings are about, not just individual crimes by individual officials, but the systematic corruption of an entire institution. The Justice Department is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to make decisions based on law and evidence, not based on what the president wants. But these recordings apparently show Trump's people treating DOJ like a political operation, using it to go after enemies, using it to protect friends, using it to obstruct investigations into Trump himself. And if that's become normalized, if that's just how DOJ operates now under Trump, then we've lost one of the most important safeguards in our entire system of government. Because if the Justice Department is just an extension of the White House, if it's just a tool for the president to use however he wants, then there's no check on presidential power. The president can break the law with impunity because the department that's supposed to enforce the law answers to him. And career DOJ employees are watching all of this. They're seeing their institution corrupted. They're seeing their work undermined. They're seeing criminals go free and innocent people targeted for political reasons. and some of them are speaking out, like the sources who've been talking to reporters about these recordings, but a lot of them are just keeping their heads down, trying to survive, waiting for this to pass, and you can't really blame them because speaking out could cost them everything. 6. Let's talk about what happens next, procedurally. Jack Smith has asked for permission to testify. Congress needs to decide whether to call him as a witness. The DOJ needs to decide whether to allow it or try to block it. If Congress does call him, there will be hearings. Those hearings will be televised. Smith will testify under oath. He'll present evidence, potentially including playing portions of the recordings. Democrats will ask questions designed to draw out the most damaging information. Republicans will try to discredit him and minimize the significance of the evidence. And the whole thing will be a media circus. Trump will be live tweeting or true socialing his reactions. His supporters will be attacking Smith and anyone who defends him. His opponents will be demanding impeachment and criminal charges. And at the end of it all, we'll probably be right back where we started. Democrats will say the evidence proves Trump is corrupt and must be removed. Republicans will say it's all a partisan witch hunt and Trump did nothing wrong, and nothing will fundamentally change because neither side has the power to force the other to act unless something shifts, unless enough Republicans finally decide that the evidence is too damning to ignore, unless enough public pressure builds that politicians feel they have to respond, unless the tapes are so clear and so devastating that even Trump's defenders can't spin them. That's the hope anyway. That's why Smith is doing this. He's betting that the truth still matters, that evidence still matters, that the American people, if they hear what actually happened, will demand accountability. So where does this leave us? We're potentially days or weeks away from one of the most significant congressional hearings in American history. Jack Smith, the former special counsel who investigated Trump, is ready to testify about evidence of obstruction of justice and corruption at the highest levels of government. He has audio recordings that allegedly prove Trump administration officials interfered with federal prosecutions and discussed retaliating against investigators. If those recordings are released, if Smith testifies publicly, it could be the biggest political bombshell since Watergate. Or it could be another scandal that gets absorbed into our polarized politics and ultimately changes nothing. We don't know yet. What we do know is that Trump is melting down. He's attacking Smith, he's threatening prosecution, he's claiming it's all fake. And that tells you he's scared of what's on those tapes. We know that Democrats are seizing the opportunity. They're demanding transparency. They're calling for investigations. They're preparing for hearings. And we know that Republicans are circling the wagons. They're defending Trump. They're attacking Smith. They're trying to prevent the truth from coming out. So stay tuned because this story is just beginning. Jack Smith's secret DOJ tapes could rock Washington like nothing we've seen in years. And what happens next could determine whether we still have a functioning system of justice and accountability or whether we fully transition to a system where power is the only thing that matters. Trust me, you're going to want to be paying very close attention to how this unfolds.